Or DNA?
DNA.
DNA sample?
DNA.
For centuries, the origins of the mysterious Minoans lay hidden beneath Crete's ancient ruins.
Well, although this bone is over 500 years old, it's quite possible that there are traces of DNA from the microorganism which caused the disease in this individual. Only if we're successful in extracting DNA from this bone.
But now, groundbreaking DNA research has uncovered the truth, one that challenges everything we believed about them. What scientists found in their remains doesn't just reshape Minoan history, it transforms our understanding of Europe's earliest great civilization, revealing surprising connections that redefine the roots of Western culture and its first remarkable society. A palace in the sea. Long before Greece became famous for its philosophers and marble temples, another great culture ruled the Aegean. It was called the Minoan civilization, and it grew on the island of Crete, a sunlit stretch of land surrounded by deep blue seas. From around 3000 to 1450 BC, this island became one of the most advanced places in the Bronze Age world. At the heart of Minoan life, there were these magnificent palaces. The most famous was Knossos, a maze of grand halls, painted walls, and stairways that seemed to lead everywhere. Other palaces rose at Phaistos and Malia, each one filled with storerooms, courtyards, and drainage systems far ahead of their time. Unlike many ancient peoples, the Minoans did not seem to build huge fortresses or walls, which was quite surprising to archaeologists. If they were not guarding against invaders, maybe they felt safe on their island, protected by the sea. Or maybe their power came not from war, but from trade and skill. But we are able to get a glimpse into how they lived by studying their arts. On the walls of Knossos, bright frescoes show people leaping over bulls, dancing, and celebrating life. There are no scenes of battle or conquest, only movement and color. The Minoans seem to have loved the sea, nature, and beauty. They traded with Egypt, the Near East, and other Aegean islands, carrying olive oil, pottery, and fine metalwork. Crete became a bridge between worlds, linking continents and cultures through ships and stories. However, one big mystery has always followed the Minoans. Who were they? For over a century, archaeologists have argued about their origins. Were they native to Crete, a people who rose from the island's own early farmers? Or did they come from somewhere else? Perhaps Egypt, North Africa, or the Near East? Early scholars thought the Minoans must have come from abroad. After all, their art looked unlike anything from mainland Greece. Their writing system, called Linear A, has never been fully read. And the palace designs reminded some researchers of buildings seen in Egypt and the Levant. It seemed easy to believe that the Minoans were the children of migration, not of Crete itself. Others, however, saw things differently. They noticed how local the materials were, how deeply the Minoan style seemed rooted in the island's own soil and traditions. Maybe the Minoans were homegrown, rising from local Neolithic farmers who slowly became more complex and creative. The sea may not have brought conquerors, but inspiration. For decades, this debate circled round and round. No one could agree, and theories rose and fell with every new dig. But now, everything has changed, and the Minoans may at last tell us where they came from through their DNA. The old theories. Before science could study ancient DNA, the story of the Minoans was built almost entirely on guesses and imagination. Archaeologists and writers tried to explain how such a rich and complex culture could appear so early on a small island. Without clear texts or solid evidence, the question of their origins became a puzzle open to every kind of theory. One of the first people to establish that story was Sir Arthur Evans, the British archaeologist who began excavating Knossos in the early 1900s. He was the one who named the people Minoans, after King Minos, the legendary ruler from Greek myth. Evans saw in their art and architecture something both elegant and foreign. The bright colors, the flowing lines, and the symbols reminded him of Egypt and North Africa. He believed the Minoans might have come from there, perhaps as settlers who brought advanced skills to Crete. To Evans, their grace and order seemed almost too developed to have grown in isolation. Soon enough, other scholars added their own ideas. Some pointed toward Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, suggesting that the Minoans were connected to the ancient peoples of the Near East. Others saw possible links to the Balkans, thinking that migrations from the north could have introduced new technologies and designs to Crete. Each theory tried to explain how the island could have become a center of power and creativity so early, but none could be proved. Other than archaeology, the mystery of the Minoans attracted a lot of myth. Their palaces and legends stirred the imagination of storytellers. Some writers linked them to the tale of Atlantis, the fabled island said to have vanished beneath the sea. The idea of a lost civilization with high art and sudden destruction seemed to fit the Minoan story perfectly. The volcanic eruption that devastated the nearby island of Thera, Santorini, gave the theory more weight. To many, the Minoans weren't historical, but mythical survivors from a forgotten age of wonder. But other thinkers took a more cautious path. They argued that the Minoans were not mysterious strangers at all, but skilled borrowers. Crete existed in the middle of busy sea routes, connecting Egypt, the Near East, and the Greek mainland. Traders could have brought foreign ideas that the islanders adapted and made their own. In this view, the columns, frescoes, and religious symbols that seemed Egyptian or Eastern were not proof of migration, but of inspiration. Crete, they said, was like a sponge, soaking up what it found useful and creating something fresh from it. Still, the problem was that no one could read the Minoans' own words. Their main writing system remains undeciphered to this day. Without readable records, archaeologists could not hear the voices of the people themselves. They could only look at buildings, art, and tools, and those could be interpreted in many ways. Plus, the position of the island made the whole thing a bit more confusing. Crete sits at a crossroads of continents. From the shore, one could sail to Africa, Asia, or Europe. It seemed logical to assume that influences must have come from one of those directions. For decades, that reasoning influenced every idea about the Minoans. But as time passed, the old models didn't seem to be enough anymore. They were based on guesswork and myths more than proof. However, that would soon change. What the DNA reveals, for more than 100 years, the mystery of who the Minoans were was mostly a guessing game. That changed when science found a way to look inside their bones. In the last decade, new studies using ancient DNA have started to rewrite the story of the Minoans, giving us facts instead of theories. These studies let us see where their ancestors came from, how much they mixed with others, and what that means for how their civilization began. The first big step happened in 2013, when a team of scientists studied mitochondrial DNA, the kind passed from mothers to children, from 37 ancient skeletons found in the Lassithi Plateau of Crete. This work, published in Nature Communications and recorded in PubMed, compared the Minoans' DNA with that of both ancient and modern populations around the world. The result was quite surprising. Instead of showing strong links to North Africa or Egypt, as many older theories had claimed, the Minoans' closest genetic ties were to early European farmers, especially those from Neolithic Greece and Western Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. They also showed close similarity to modern people living in Crete and mainland Greece today. This meant that the people who built the first palaces of Knossos and Phaistos were not newcomers from Africa or the Near East. They were mostly descendants of local Neolithic settlers, who were the first farmers who reached the Aegean thousands of years earlier. The DNA showed no major North African signal, directly challenging Arthur Evans's idea that the Minoans came from Egypt or Libya. In simple terms, the genetic data noted that these people had deep roots in the island and surrounding region. Then, in 2017, another study took things further. This time, a large group of researchers led by Harvard University's David Reich examined genome-wide ancient DNA from 19 ancient individuals, including both Minoans from Crete and Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. The results, published in Nature, gave the clearest picture yet. The Minoans and Mycenaeans were closely related, sharing about 3/4, 75% of their ancestry, with early Neolithic farmers from Western Anatolia and the Aegean region. The remaining portion came from populations linked to the Caucasus and Iran. This meant that the Minoans were not isolated, but their main ancestry came from the same farming communities that spread across Europe during the early Neolithic. These groups had already been living in the region for thousands of years before the rise of Minoan civilization. So instead of being the result of a big invasion or a mass migration, the Minoan culture likely grew locally, built on people who had long lived in and around the Aegean. The DNA also suggested that Minoans and Mycenaeans were genetically very similar, though not identical. The Mycenaeans had slightly more of the eastern ancestry from the Caucasus or Iran. This small difference may reflect later contact between mainland Greece and populations farther east. But in general, both groups shared a common background. Then, in 2022, a newer study added even more detail to what was already known by combining DNA and isotope analysis. Scientists looked at the chemical makeup of bones and teeth from Minoan burials, focusing on strontium and sulfur isotopes, which are elements that record where a person grew up based on the local food and water they consumed. These isotope values can show whether someone was local to Crete or came from somewhere else. The results showed that most of the individuals were local, born and raised on Crete. Their DNA matched the earlier findings, which was clear genetic continuity with Neolithic Aegean peoples. But a few individuals had non-local isotope values, meaning they grew up outside Crete before being buried there. Interestingly, these outsiders mostly appeared later in the Minoan period, around or after 1450 BC. This timing is important because it suggests that by the late Minoan period, when Crete's society was changing and interacting more with mainland Greece and other parts of the Mediterranean, a few people from elsewhere were entering the island. These individuals could have been traders, craftsmen, or members of elite families moving through growing networks of exchange. But the key point is that this was not mass migration, but selective movement. When we combine all three studies, we can begin to see a clear picture. The Minoans were largely indigenous. Their civilization was not imported, but developed on Crete by people who had lived in the region since the early farming era. The small amount of Eastern ancestry likely came from long-distance contacts or intermarriage, not from large-scale invasions. This new evidence changes how we think about the birth of civilization. For many years, historians assumed that complex societies needed outside influence, and that progress flowed from the cradles of civilization like Egypt or Mesopotamia to smaller places like Crete. But the Minoan DNA tells a different story. It shows that the people of Crete built something original from their own roots. They didn't just copy ideas from others, but they built their world with their own hands and imagination. Why it changes everything. The findings from the multiple genetic studies changes almost everything we once thought we knew. First, it shows that the Minoans did not come mainly from North Africa, as Sir Arthur Evans and others proposed. The DNA evidence makes it clear that there is no strong North African signal in their genes. Instead, their closest ties are to early Neolithic farmers from Crete, the Aegean, and Western Anatolia. This means the story of Minoan origins is not one of migration, but of a long chain of people evolving on the same island through time. Second, it breaks the idea that the Minoans were a transplanted culture. For many years, scholars assumed that true sophistication, such as writing, palace planning, metalwork, and art, had to be imported from older cradles of civilization like Mesopotamia or Egypt. The Minoans seemed too advanced to have developed all that on their own, but now we know they could have. Their brilliance was homegrown, built by generations of farmers, traders, and artists who slowly turned Crete into a center of creativity. Third, this new evidence forces us to rethink where innovation comes from. The old model suggested that big continents invent and small islands copy. But the Minoans proved the opposite can be true. An island, isolated yet connected by trade routes, can become a spark of innovation. Crete's position in the Mediterranean may have helped its people combine stability with curiosity. They learned from others, but they built their world in their own image. This is more than a small correction to history, but a rewrite of how we understand the growth of civilization. The idea that culture flows from east to west, or from large powers to smaller places, suddenly feels outdated. The Minoans show that cultural energy can move both ways. Islands can be sources of invention, and not just receivers. And yet, the story goes beyond isolation. The latest studies, especially those using isotopes, show that by the late Minoan period, A few individuals from outside Crete appeared in the population. These were not conquerors or settlers arriving in waves, but a handful of people who came for trade, diplomacy, or opportunity. This creates a hybrid model of civilization, one built on strong local roots, but open to selective exchange. We now know that the Minoans were not closed off, but knew how to connect and adapt. In fact, there might be lessons that could be learned from these discoveries about how we see other ancient societies. Maybe many lost cultures that were at a time assumed to be the result of migration or outside guidance were actually self-made. Which brings us to the question, if the Minoans built greatness from their own soil, what other civilizations might have done the same? How many stories have we told backward, crediting outside influence where there was local genius all along? Unanswered mysteries and what's next? Even with all the progress made by DNA research, there are still so many gaps in the Minoan story. Science has helped uncover where their ancestors came from, but many deeper questions remain. Ancient DNA can trace ancestry, but it cannot tell us what the Minoans believed, how they spoke, or how they saw themselves. The mystery of their writing, Linear A, remains unsolved. Until someone can read those clay tablets, the Minoans' own words will never be known. We can map their genes, but not yet their thoughts. We also still know very little about how their society worked. The Minoans built complex palaces with storage rooms, courtyards, and frescoes, yet there is little sign of kings or armies. Unlike the Mycenaeans who followed them, the Minoans left behind almost no weapons or fortifications. This makes their form of leadership hard to define. Did they rule through religion, trade, or shared power? Were their palaces centers of ceremony rather than command? Without written records, we can only guess. Another question surrounds the few non-local individuals found in late Minoan times. The isotope studies show they came from outside Crete, but who were they? Were they traders, diplomats, artisans, or marriage partners? Did they bring new ideas? Or were they absorbed into Minoan culture? Their presence hints at growing connections across the Aegean and beyond, but their exact role remains unclear. And then there is the biggest question of all. What caused the collapse of Minoan civilization around 1450 to 1400 BC? The palaces burned, the culture changed, and soon after, the Mycenaeans from mainland Greece took hold of Crete. Was this caused by natural disasters, such as the great eruption of Thera, Santorini? Or did internal troubles, like economic strain or decline in trade, play a larger part? DNA can tell us about ancestry, but not about earthquakes or politics. The fall of the Minoans remains one of the great mysteries of the Bronze Age. Still, every discovery brings us one step closer. The next course of action for researchers is to widen the genetic map. So far, only a small number of Minoan skeletons have been tested. Future studies aim to include more samples, especially from the late Minoan and post-Minoan periods. This could show how the population changed after the palaces fell and how much influence later Mycenaean arrivals had. Scientists also want to link DNA results with isotope data and archaeology to connect genes with daily life. This means studying bones, burial goods, and art together to understand who these people were beyond their biology. For instance, were certain DNA lineages linked with specific crafts or social roles? Did outsiders marry into local families, or did they stay separate? Another exciting frontier is the combination of genetic data with cultural evidence, comparing what science says about movement with what art, architecture, and religion suggest about ideas. A more complete picture may present itself when the hard data of genetics meets the soft clues of belief and creativity. If this model of a hybrid civilization continues to hold, it may apply far beyond Crete. Other advanced yet isolated cultures, once thought to be offshoots of great empires, might turn out to be homegrown too. The Minoans could be just the first of several ancient societies whose roots lie deeper and closer to home than anyone guessed. We now know where the Minoans came from, but will we ever know what made them who they were? Would their own story match the one we've written for them, or challenge everything we think we know? Leave your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, Please click on the next one on your screen.